My name is George Laws Garcia. I'm the Executive Director of the Puerto Rico Statehood Council. And tonight we're hosting a conversation on how to support the Puerto Rico Statehood Admission Act. The Puerto Rico Statehood Admission Act is a bill that was introduced in the U.S. House of Representatives last week on Tuesday, March 2nd. It was introduced by Resident Commissioner of Puerto Rico, Jennifer Gonzalez Colon, along with Florida Congressman Darren Soto. And on introduction, it had 51 co-sponsors, which is a great number. And the co-sponsors were bipartisan. There were both Democrats and Republicans supporting the bill. And what the bill does is it basically acknowledges the results of the referendum that was held in November 2020, where a majority of voters in Puerto Rico, 52.5%, voted yes to Puerto Rico's immediate admission as a state. And then the bill goes on to set the terms for Puerto Rico's admission into the Union, offers officially admission as a state to Puerto Rico on equal footing with all states, and then establishes a ratification vote so that the people of Puerto Rico can officially determine if they want statehood in a yes or no vote, which is exactly the same procedure that was followed in Hawaii and Alaska in 1958 and 1959, which were the last two states admitted to the Union. And it's a fair process. It allows everyone on the island to participate. Everyone who supports statehood can vote yes, and everyone who opposes it for whatever reason can vote no. But it is very respectful of the majority that voted, in that it doesn't try to create any new definitions or prolong the process any further. If the people of Puerto Rico vote yes under that ratification vote, then we're admitted into the Union. And there's a brief transition period that can be extended no longer than 12 months. But after that, Congress wouldn't need to take any further action. So it really does put the potential for Puerto Rico to achieve full democracy and equality directly in the hands of voters in Puerto Rico. And if the majority were to vote no, then Puerto Rico remains a territory with the capacity to select another non-territorial option through either a plebiscite or any other mechanism that is determined by local authorities. So, that's a little bit about the Puerto Rico Statehood Admission Act. There was an announcement last week also that Senator Martin Heinrich of New Mexico has indicated his intention to introduce a Senate companion bill. That's very significant because it's the first time that we would have a Senate companion bill for a direct statehood admission act. And right now there's efforts underway to try to see if we can get bipartisan introduction to that bill. And our main focus of this conversation tonight is to have an opportunity to speak to three individuals that have been very highly engaged on this issue for some time now, each one with their own vantage point and perspective that they can offer to help us, first of all, understand, how congressional offices function, how we can communicate effectively with them, and, what are some of the tactics and strategies that they recommend for how you as citizen advocates can make an effort and take action to advocate in support of the Puerto Rico Statehood Admission Act. So with that, I'm going to briefly do a round of introductions for our speakers tonight. I'm going to go ahead and start out with Janille. Janille Rodriguez-Beamud is a policy and legislative relations executive She's an attorney, and she most recently served as the Deputy Chief of Staff and Legislative Counsel for Puerto Rico's current resident commissioner, Jennifer Gonzalez Colon, in the U.S. House of Representatives. Prior to that, Janille served for 4 years in top staff roles in Puerto Rico House of Representatives, as well as Director of Legal Affairs in the Puerto Rico Labor Relation Board. And she was also the Chief of Staff to the Mayor of Ponce. Welcome to the stage, Janille. We greatly appreciate your participation in our program tonight.
Oh, thank you so much, George, and thank you to everybody that has been connected to this chat. And I hope that at some point during this Congress, we can reach at least the passing of this bill in the House. I know that it's a pretty tough route that we are facing, but I know that we can make it sooner or later.
Excellent. Well, I'll go ahead and do the introductions for Jose and Matt, and then provide each of you, a few minutes to give some opening remarks. So with that, next person is Matt Helder. Matt is a Washington state-based public policy professional. He's a former city council member in the city of DuPont, Washington. He served in that capacity from 2016 to 2020. He was also a legislative assistant to the House Republicans in Washington State from 2014 to 2020 in the state legislature over there. And before he became involved in state and local politics, Matt served in the U.S. Army as a field artillery officer from 2010 and 2014. In 2012, he deployed to Afghanistan, where he led fellow American soldiers from Puerto Rico in combat, which is, part of the reason why he has a direct connection with this issue. He currently serves as the Washington, D.C. Washington Director of Government Relations for the American Cancer Society. He's a graduate of Whitworth University and received an active duty commission in the United States Army from Gonzaga University. He has a master's degree in international relations with a regional focus on Latin America and the Caribbean from Troy University. So all the way from Washington State, welcome, Matt.
Thanks, George. Appreciate it. I want to actually give a little background. You mentioned when I was in Afghanistan in 2012, that was really where I first became introduced to this issue. When I was there, we had a presidential election, 2012, Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. And also in 2012, there was a plebiscite in Puerto Rico. And before that, I had not really known much about the issue, as a lot of Americans, frankly, didn't in 2012. Things have certainly changed since then, but before, it was sort of an introduction for me then. And that plebiscite, statehood won, and I began to think, how is it possible that I have two soldiers that I'm in charge of that are from Puerto Rico that are unable to vote for their commander-in-chief, whose families back on the island are unable to vote for the president that is sending their sons into combat. Ever since then, this has been an issue that has been very near and dear to me. And in recent times, I've been more and more involved in the issue as I've learned that, you know what, this is not going to happen if people on the mainland do not get involved in this issue. At the end of the day, as we've talked about the Admission Act, the United States Congress has to admit Puerto Rico as a state. And that's not going to happen organically. There has to be a groundswell of support from the constituents who are sending these members to Congress. So I'm going to be hammering that point home over and over again. You'll be hearing that over and over again from me, that we need to be creating that groundswell on the mainland, getting more people in states involved. There's been in the past, and I'm sure you've all seen it, where people are saying, you're not Puerto Rican, you can't be involved in this conversation. That is simply not true. There are Puerto Ricans that we need to be listening to and getting involved in. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm passionate about this, and I appreciate the opportunity to be involved in this panel.
Excellent, Matt. Thank you so much for that background and your personal statement. And I fully agree. I think that ultimately Congress holds Puerto Rico as a U.S. territory on behalf of the voting public state side. So if we don't get the voting public state side to get involved in this issue, we're never going to stop having this undemocratic colonial territory status. So thank you so much for your support and your participation in tonight's event. And our third speaker is José Cabrera. José is an attorney and U.S. Army veteran and a diehard Puerto Rico statehood advocate. He's currently the chair of the Puerto Rico Star Project and co-chair of the Puerto Rico Young Republican Federation. He co-founded and was national president of the Puerto Rico Statehood Student Association. He serves as the community programs officer in the U.S. Department of Agriculture Rural Development Office in Puerto Rico. Prior to joining USDA, he served as a paralegal and non-commissioned officer in the United States Army. Jose holds a BA and a law degree from the University of Dayton and a master's degree in international relations from the University of Oklahoma. Thank you so much, Jose, for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you, George. It's truly a pleasure to join fine company. We've been working together for some time now, and a pleasure to meet you, Janille and Matt. We have been working together as well in spreading the message of statehood. It truly is a fantastic experience getting to meet so many people that are committed to this cause, to this effort. To provide equality for American citizens. Like Matt mentioned, some of these citizens go into combat, they carry the flag on their shoulder, but as soon as they get back to our islands, our home, this little piece of America, they are denied equality. And that is something that I think is fundamentally wrong. I think it tarnishes what our country as a republic stands for in the global sphere. And it's up to us to fix that. So thank you for the opportunity, and let's get on with the show.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Jose, for those opening remarks. And I wanted to basically kick off the conversation with Janille. Janille, you recently served in the office of the resident commissioner, Jennifer Gonzalez. You were deeply involved in a lot of efforts to advance Puerto Rico statehood and this issue within that office, and saw the inner workings of that office as well as other congressional offices. You know, how do you see the recent bill introduction, and how would you suggest that people who are interested in advocating in support of Puerto Rico statehood and this bill in particular, that they reach out to congressional offices?
Well, George, first, when I moved to Washington, D.C. after the 2016 elections, and I was taking the new members orientation as a staffer, I noticed that a lot of new members and their spouses, they had no idea on the political status of Puerto Rico. I noticed that they didn't know at that time that Puerto Ricans can vote for the president. They had the idea that we can vote for the candidates. I have to clarify, no, we can vote during primaries, either Republican or Democratic, but we can vote on general elections. And I think that the best way to involve new people in our cause or our fight is to educate them. Not only mainlanders, but also, and the most important, are the member of Congress. We have to let them know how Puerto Ricans are treated even when we are part of the homeland. Because in Puerto Rico, the US is present in every single corner. The US government is the one that authorized the landing of your flight when you are trying to get in the island. It's the FAA, if not the Puerto Rican Aviation Administration. So we are involved in any single aspect of the American life. So for me, education is the key for success, especially in Congress, in Washington, D.C., also in the White House, and also to attract more supporters beyond the Puerto Rican communities.
Yeah, and Janille, as a former congressional staffer myself, I worked with resident commissioner Pedro Pierluisi during 3.5 years in his second term in office. One of the things that staff members did was basically take meetings with constituents and other groups on behalf of their members, but they also opened up correspondence, like physical letters for their members. They reviewed emails. Can you tell us a little bit more about the types of activity that you as a staff member did on behalf of resident commissioner Gonzalez, and that your team did to help communicate to her all of these inputs that are happening, whether it was on social media or through mail correspondence or phone calls? How does all of that get channeled to a member? How does a member find out that the constituents care about an issue?
Well, as you mentioned, the staff basically filter every single piece of correspondence. So the member, I think that nobody has time to read every single letter that arrived to a congressional office. So we filter the communication, and I think that the best way to communicate the members of with the members of Congress is through not only social media. They used to react a lot to comments in the social media, but also I highly recommend to every single group, because I know that there are a lot of groups supporting statehood throughout the nation, but I highly recommend to design a one-pager with facts. And what does that mean? With facts, I want to say, hey, do you know that Puerto Ricans can vote for the President of the United States? Do you know that federal law is enforceable and applicable in Puerto Rico, but they don't come with representation in the House and the Senate? Do you know that Puerto Ricans have been fighting alongside the mainlanders in Korea, World War I, World War II, Afghanistan, Desert Storm? Even more, I learned from a reliable source that the latest record of a Puerto Rican in the US military is back from the Civil War. So one Puerto Rican was fighting for the US even during we were a Spanish colony. So we have always been there back in America. So I highly recommend to design one-pagers, two-pagers, no more than that, because as I mentioned by the very beginning of this message, nobody has time to read a lot of documents. So I have to point out the more impressive or specific information about the situation.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Janille. Matt, you would want to chime in, feel free to do so.
Sure. I want to say that as someone who served as a legislative assistant also, granted at the state level, so in the state legislature in Washington, I served as a legislative assistant for actually 1 year before moving to the policy staff with the House Republicans. But one thing that's important in constituent communications is that you need both quantity and you need quality of communication. You could have one very well thought out letter that says that we need to annex Canada into the Union, but that's not going to matter because it's ridiculous and it's only one person. But if you have multiple well thought out messages that show that there is a widespread base of support for something like Puerto Rico statehood, that begins to make an impact. There are multiple ways to do that. You can chime in on social media. You can send emails. You can be involved in groups like the Puerto Rico Statehood Council. You could send and have those one pagers that you can speak off of or write your letters from the heart. Form letters have their place where you put in your information, your name, address, and then it gets blasted to your member of Congress. That works too. That shows that there is a quantity of support, that there's a groundswell of support. But you also need the sincere kind of communication that shows that this person truly does care about this issue. That's what I've done in communicating with my member of Congress, my Senator Cantwell. They have received personal communications from me and meeting requests from me because as someone who lives in a state, I have the privilege of having a voting member of Congress and having a United States Senator. So for those of you that are, again, watching this, living in a state, this cause needs your voice. It needs your communication to your member of Congress, to your senator. And ideally, that is repeatedly done to keep the issue front of mind, especially right now with a bill that's been introduced in Congress and soon to come in the Senate. And again, the quality of the communication matters as well. A sincere personal connection matters. Using facts of where this debate is matters because when you get elected, I'll tell you now, is putting on my former elected official hat, when you get elected to an office, you don't get hit on the head with a stick that makes you an expert in every issue all of a sudden. You still need people to educate you. And one of the best parts of working as an elected official can be your constituents. If they are sending those well thought out messages, advocating for a certain cause, educating you, people like Janille who are working in sort of that government relations space that are, they do that professionally. And that can frankly be kind of tiresome. That's what I do for a living. When you are only hearing from government relations folks instead of constituents. So constituents in states, you have a huge role to play here in support of this cause. So don't be afraid to be involved. You'll be shocked at how accessible your elected officials actually are. Their offices will respond to you if you are a constituent. So don't be afraid to jump in with both feet and give voice to the people in Puerto Rico that have repeatedly shown their support for statehood.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Matt. Jose.
Yes, I think to synchronize with what Janille and Matt have been speaking about, the entity that's going to decide Puerto Rico status is Congress. So that's Capitol Hill is where this is going to be decided. But the factors that are going to make statehood win lie in the states. What are those factors? Matt just spoke about that. You need constituents, you need folks that are based in representative districts, you need people that are based in their Senate districts to compel legislators to support statehood for Puerto Rico. Some legislators are very well versed on the issue of Puerto Rico, but they vote otherwise because they may have other interests. But the biggest interest that they have is being elected every 2 or 6 years, depending on the situation. our challenge as a movement is to recruit advocates for statehood, whether it's folks from the island that move stateside, or fellow citizens like Matt, for example, that are outraged in a way by the circumstance, and they want to get involved. This is, again, there are in a country of over 300 million people. There's so many things that are happening, and we are in the periphery. We're an archipelago in the Caribbean Sea. We're not exactly the front page news of the New York Times every day, but the only people that are going to make that work on a national scale is residents of the states. They are the bosses of the people that are going to make us a state. Education of members of Congress is necessary, like Janille mentioned, but that's the right hook. The left hook is to get their constituents, to push them, to compel them, to tell them, hey, I know I know you have your piece of legislation. I know you have 5 other issues, but this issue for me is critical because I have my mother back in the island. My son is back in the island. And they're in a circumstance, they're not only disenfranchised at multiple levels, but they're being discriminated in so many ways. And you have to make that a priority. And it's simple. They don't have to introduce a bill. We already have a bill introduced. They have to support it. So it's not like they have to create rocket science here. They just have to be compelled to support. And how do you do that? Well, this is what Matt mentioned. You have to engage circles of influence within the states. There are Hispanic organizations. There are Asian organizations. There are other minority organizations. There are bar associations. The statehood issues should be the type of issue that should not only involve people, let's say, from the Federalist Society, which are one part of the ideological spectrum. It should also engage people that are perhaps more in the center and to the left. There are wide opportunities to engage people on this matter. It's just that you need to reach them so that then they will become vocal advocates for your cause. And then once our folks go to Congress, they're more persuasive because not only the argument, but also the pressure that they have back home.
Yeah, no, I think that's super important feedback, Jose, and really critical because the reality is that we have to ensure that we get voices speaking up on behalf of the people of Puerto Rico, supporting that majority that voted in favor of statehood, that the members of Congress, have to listen to, and those are the voting constituents stateside. Matt, did you have something you wanted to share?
Oh, I was going to say 2 things. One, a lobbying effort often will involve a significant education period. I think that the Puerto Rico statehood movement has really sort of entered that phase in 2012. And now in 2020, with the 2020 plebiscite, up or down, statehood, yes or no, I think this is the transition where the Puerto Rican statehood movement has moved from education into we're going to take action now. So there exists a window of opportunity for people to be involved. And I want to say that on this issue, and in any issue really, you do not need unanimous consent for something to be made law. You need consensus. That is what politics is about. That is how things get done in any legislative body. And as a former elected official, as someone who has written legislation and amendments, as someone who works in the lobbying and advocacy sphere, I can tell you this: there is an obvious political consensus in Puerto Rico regarding statehood. And there are proactive efforts out there to deny that are mostly obstructionist and mostly, ironically, based in states. Of course, other opinions exist on this issue, and in a democratic republic, we're going to respect that. But the consensus should govern. And what I think people in DC, be it a member of Congress or be it just someone in a state like Kansas, who doesn't really know much about this issue, they still do need to be educated that there is a consensus. We hear over and over again, we need to let Puerto Rico decide. I think you see that all over the place. So letting folks know that Puerto Rico has decided. They've done it 3 times now at the ballot box. They have elected pro-statehood officials up and down the ballot. There is a consensus on this issue, and now it's time for us as Americans to recognize that this is now a civil rights issue with fellow American citizens, fellow veterans like my friend Jose, who are being denied basic American unalienable rights because of this sort of legal fiction of the unincorporated territory. It's time for us as Americans to move into the advocacy space on behalf of the people who don't have a voice. We have an enormous privilege to have a voice in DC, and it's time for us to use that on behalf of Puerto Ricans.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Matt. So, we know that a lot of the participants that are listening in right now are people in Puerto Rico and residents in Puerto Rico. So, Matt and Janille, one of the questions that I have for both of you is, if you are a resident of Puerto Rico and, obviously, the resident commissioner already supports this. So contacting her is not necessarily the most impactful thing that you can do. What would you recommend is the most impactful thing that someone who supports Puerto Rico statehood in Puerto Rico can do to try to help put pressure on the US Congress in the voting members that will actually be able to help move this forward? Janille?
Well, George, and I'm going to repeat it. It's all about education. There are more Puerto Ricans in the mainland than in the island. Here we are just 3.1. And in the mainland, there are like 6 million of Puerto Ricans, so maybe more. It's impossible to get an exact number. But everybody in the island has a parent, a friend, someone. We have a relative in the mainland. Everybody has at least one. So what we can do, we can educate them to make them educate their perks in the neighborhood, in their communities, and also to urge their representative in Congress to support the statehood of Puerto Rico. We can start the message here. We already start a campaign. I have been involved in this basically since I was a little baby. So we already have done a lot here in the island, so we start to move the message to the mainland. And as I mentioned before, every single Puerto Rican from the island has a relative or a friend in the US. So there's time to use them as a mechanism to advocate for equal rights. As a lawyer, I see statehood not as a issue of a political issue, not a matter of federal funding. I see this as democracy under the US Constitution. And the US has been fighting abroad for democracy and advocating for democracy in Cuba, in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, Middle East, and Africa. But they have a big trouble in their homeland, and that big trouble is Puerto Rico. They are not given the very same rights. They are not extending the American democracy to Puerto Rico.
Excellent. Thank you, Janille. Jose or Matt, did you have anything to say on that?
Sure. So I would say that for people that are based on the island, I think Janille said it well. If you have a connection on the mainland, use that connection. If this is an issue that you are passionate about, and you have friends or family that have voting representation in Congress, ask them and do what I actually have just done, which is I've requested a meeting with my member of Congress and said, hey, I actually would like to speak with you about this issue. And joining me in the meeting, because everything is done on Zoom now, right? Joining me in the meeting will be my friend from Puerto Rico to speak to you about this issue. She doesn't have a voting member of Congress. She doesn't have a United States senator. This is an issue that I'm passionate about, but I know that we have to be strategic here. There is still the idea that, well, what does Puerto Rico think? And they don't know that there is a consensus on the island. So use your connections on the mainland. Don't be afraid to be involved in meetings with other members of Congress on the mainland. And Janille touched on another thing, which is sort of, what is the issue of the day? And over the past year, we've seen enormous awareness raised over the idea of systemic racism in the United States. And that is the root cause of why Puerto Rico is where it is. The unincorporated territory status is a vestige of the insular cases, which are plainly racist in its language and the prejudice of the Supreme Court members that made those decisions. Bringing that issue to the forefront of the minds of members of Congress, it has huge potential to make inroads to show that, wow, this is something that needs to be resolved. And we should listen to, then you tie that into, okay, yes, let's listen to what Puerto Ricans are saying. Here's what they've said since 2012. Look, here's who they've elected to Congress. Here's who's in La Fortaleza. There is a consensus around this issue. And so again, just to wrap up my comment, if you're in Puerto Rico, reach out to your friends and family on the mainland. And if you're on the mainland, reach out to your member of Congress, and don't be afraid to bring in someone from the island into a meeting with you to discuss this issue.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. Definitely agree 100% that, part of the key to making our issue more relevant is also to, weave the topic of Puerto Rico's statehood and the need to end Puerto Rico's territorial status into the context of national issues that are driving the attention of the American public and Congress. And right now, the issue of the need to address structural racism is something that is very front and center as part of the national political discourse. And clearly, in the case of Puerto Rico's territorial status, the roots of territorial colonialism are fundamentally racist, as you mentioned. So there is an opportunity there to use this moment of attention nationally to highlight that the foundation of this unequal treatment of American citizens in Puerto Rico is related to this structural racism that does need to be eradicated for America to live up to its highest values. Jose, you wanted to chime in on it.
Sure. For example, let's say you live in the islands, you have relatives in the state of Missouri or Washington or Louisiana, and you're wondering what you can do. Like Janille and Matt mentioned, educate your family members, educate your friends, but also if they want to get engaged themselves, help them out. Tell them, hey, do you want to work on something that you want to write for your local newspaper? Perhaps a letter to the editor, perhaps an opinion piece for your local newspaper. That just by itself, helping your fellow statehooders out in the mainland. If something gets published, that can be taken to a congressional office and told, hey, you have a constituent here. They published this in your local newspaper. There is an expression in favor of statehood, and you should take that into consideration. You should take that into account. That is something that you can do while being here on the island. We've been working through multiple organizations, the Puerto Rico Young Republican Federation and the Puerto Rico Star Project, to try to get some new voices involved that are not just here from the island, but are in the States, And what we've noticed is a lot of people, they want to get engaged. They don't know how to do it because they've never done it before. And you don't have to go to college to figure out how to do this. There's not a particular basic training you have to undergo to become an advocate for statehood. You just have to do it every other day, and then you become an advocate. It's that simple. It's not too complicated. But the important thing is to get your relatives, to get your friends involved. Help them out with writing. If they have a question on an issue, help them out with that. Provide them some literature, perhaps a few links so that they can become more educated and then pass that knowledge forward. Help them out in writing. Perhaps they want to introduce the topic at a local board council meeting or in a local organization so that they can get some sort of expression from that group. Help them out in doing that. If you start doing small local deeds, but at scale, that's how you start creating a national movement, which is essentially what we need at this point to be successful.
Excellent. Well, that's some great insights and feedback. So thank you, Janille, Jose, and Matt. I would like to begin addressing some of the questions that we're getting from the audience, and just give a shout out to some of the folks that we're seeing here in the audience. We see some people obviously from Puerto Rico, from Florida, from Ohio, some of the other states. If you guys want, feel free to put into the chat box your city and state, so we have an idea of who's out there that's participating in this. And also for the folks listening in on Facebook, please feel free to hit comment and like, and also share with others. So to start out with some of the questions that we have, I wanted to give the first question we have here is from let's see. All right, so we've got a question here from Sybil. So Sybil's asking, no, I'm sorry. That's Selma, sorry. So Selma's asking, hi, any ideas as a percentage of Puerto Rican support for statehood that Congress would like to see before granting statehood? Would they accept Puerto Rico as a state with 52% support, 60%, 90%? Any answers on that? Jose?
Yes. There is no supermajority requirement to make Puerto Rico a state. Full stop. It doesn't exist. It's not in the Constitution. It's not in any law. It's not in a regulation. It's not required by the Supreme Court of the United States. Whenever you hear somebody telling you that you need a supermajority to make Puerto Rico a state, it's one of two things. They oppose statehood, but they don't say it outright. Or secondly, they just want to stall because for X or Y reason, they don't want to commit to the cause. And by implication, that's almost like being against statehood. There have been states that have voted against, well, territories at the time, that have voted against statehood. Wisconsin was one of them. They voted against statehood, and Congress still passed an enabling act. And after the enabling act, people switched and they voted for statehood. There are territories that never voted for statehood. So if it didn't apply to them, it doesn't have to apply to us either. Second, you'll notice that they'll never tell you what's sufficient, what's enough. 57, 70, 90%. If we get 90% tomorrow in a referendum, they'll tell you that 95 is necessary. That tells you everything you need to know. So for example, if you see a statehood supporter tell you that we're too divided and that we need additional support, in the case of Florida, they didn't even have 53%. So to begin with, tell them this. If it was not required for your state, do not require that from us. There is consensus on the island. We have voted for statehood 3 times. Some states never did that. So just be cognizant of that. Don't let the issue get hijacked so that we have to fight on another day, and don't let the victory that we had last year be invalidated by just false rhetoric.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jose. So to get to our next question, we have a question here from Javier Mendez. As a proud American from Puerto Rico that's lived in several states, now resident in Florida, I agree and think that Puerto Rico's statehood cause needs to have greater exposure across the whole country. How can we confront or respond to the bad media or power that the powerful federal Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez and Ocasio-Cortez that are advocating for a status convention?
I would say let Puerto Ricans decide. Let Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico decide on this issue. If we're going to talk about self-determination, let's let Puerto Rico determine how they will self-determine. That's something I've seen that's been circulating, and I think it's a great talking point, that if we're going to truly say that we believe in self-determination, then, and that we are going to listen to the voices of Puerto Ricans, then the United States Congress probably should not be dictating how that happens. Puerto Ricans are more than capable of electing their elected officials, who are more than capable of providing for referendums for the residents to vote in. I've seen many folks complain that, well, these plebiscites, these referendums are non-binding, turnout was not high enough. These goalposts will always move, like Jose was saying, will always be moved by opponents of statehood. The fact of the matter is that I know that the two congresswomen from New York have deep Puerto Rican roots, but they do not represent Puerto Rico. In fact, Congresswoman González Colón has received more votes than I think probably both of them combined in their elections. She, if I'm not mistaken, George or Janille, maybe I'm wrong here, but I think she actually received more votes than any member of Congress, given her at-large status representing Puerto Rico.
Any member of the U.S. House, at least, for sure.
Right. Yes. Yeah. There may be some senators that receive
Texas
a
and
few more votes.
California are pretty big states.
Right. Right. So yes, those are again, those are obstructionist moves. I think we have to just call it for what it is. They don't support the result, and so they are looking for another way to delay and get what it is that that they want. Whereas
Matt,
myself,
yeah, one of the things that I think that the person who's asking is trying to get to actually relates to another question we have here from Tony Figueroa, who's joining us tonight from Los Angeles, California. Obviously in Los Angeles, there's a lot of attention on people who are big in media and movie stars and all this. So he's asking, we need star power that could get attention stateside. Who can we get to draw attention in the news programs or in the newspapers to this issue? And I think it relates to the last question, because the real challenge is that Nydia Velázquez and particularly Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have an outsized voice in the national public. So, what would be your feedback, Jose or Janille's feedback, on any ideas about, how we can counter just how loud their voice is, and the fact that they're, essentially drowning out the voice of the actual voters in Puerto Rico that voted on this issue?
I think being involved in organizations like the Puerto Rico Statehood Council is your first step. If you are on the island, if you are mainland based, there are groups like this that you can give your time, your talent, and your treasure to, whose jobs are to sort of counteract that. And as far as celebrities, I mean, celebrities go where there's popularity, right? So showing that this is a movement that is popular, that has support. I think it's just a matter of time once you start doing that, that people will come out and say, hey, you know what, this is wrong and there's something we have to do to fix it. I'm not a Hollywood casting consultant, so I don't know who that would be necessarily, but you have seen some high profile athletes in the past from Puerto Rico come out in support of statehood, who were viciously attacked for doing so by many people on the mainland who don't want to see this happen. So supporting those voices when they do come out, I think, is important too, because celebrities, they want to stay popular. They're not going to put their necks out for something that they don't think has a lot of support in Puerto Rico or on the mainland. So continuing to create that groundswell that makes that a tenable position for someone with a celebrity status, I think is the way to go.
Janille.
George, I have to add to this discussion that I was in Washington, D.C. when some members of Congress started to criticize the 2017 plebiscite, including Nydia Velázquez. So, and I was like in shock because they criticized the participation of that vote, but, and I have to highlight this, some members of Congress used to run uncontested. So nobody runs against them. And especially during midterms, the members of Congress are elected by a very, very small margin of participation, sometimes 10% of the registered voters. So I don't know why they are raising this kind of concern over the plebiscites, because they have to apply the very same rule to their elections.
Yeah,
it's not fair. I don't know how they are raising this in Congress, because I remember that especially during the 2018 midterms, few members, especially from New York, run uncontested. So, and well, I know that Nydia's position, and I really appreciate what Matt says, let the Puerto Ricans vote.
Exactly. Jose.
Yes, just a quick word about the celebrity strategy. That will get you so far. It's good to get endorsements from people that have big platforms on social media so that they can spread the message and in a way create some sort of social validation for statehood in circles and in regions of the country where that's not a topic of discussion. But that will only get you so far. Folks like AOC and Nydia Velázquez, they are going to do their thing. They're going to get their platforms for reasons other than Puerto Rico statehood, and then they'll use those platforms to try to block us. The reality is, unless they are defeated in their own particular ventures as politicians, you have to try to isolate as much as possible and try to occupy other areas in which there are possibilities. Again, you can get a celebrity endorsement from somebody else to try to counter AOC or Nydia Velázquez, but if you get a state legislature from another part of the country to express, and that's the voice of an entire state, I think that's newsworthy. I think that creates a counter narrative that you have two people that do not represent Puerto Ricans trying to block us from attaining equality, and then you have other states that are welcoming us on equal footing as an equal partner in this union. I think that type of thing would create perhaps a more logical counter, as opposed to just recruiting celebrities that come and go and they're really not advocates per se. They just endorse something and create a one-liner one day and they're out the next.
Excellent. That's really great feedback. We continue to see people chime in on the chat with where they're from. We've got Roberto Reyes from North Carolina. We've got Yolanda Ramos from San Juan, Puerto Rico. We've got Hector Paz from Alexandria, Virginia. Hey, Hector, you're close by to me. We've got Selma de Jesus from Miami, Florida. Javier Mendez from Miami. Miami's in the house. Anyway, so that's pretty good. We've got another question here, which I think is definitely one that we want to answer, and it's coming in from Ed Valentin. And Ed asks, how can we succeed when both Schumer and McConnell have voiced opposition to statehood? So, yep. Matt, you have.
I was going to say the Senate is always going to be a tougher road initially. There's not really any indication that you need 60 votes, but there are a lot of people who are going to say you need 60 votes, and that's sort of how the Senate operates these days. I think one of the strengths of this movement is you have a wide coalition from Representative Soto to I think it's 14 or 15 Republican members of Congress that have signed on to Gonzalez Colon's bill. You have folks like myself that worked in Republican politics, and José as well. And then obviously on the mainland, there are more and more Democrats that are getting behind this. So as the movement expands, the statehood movement is the one that is expanding. It's the one that is bringing in more and more members, whose coalition is becoming wider and deeper as people become more and more aware. That's why awareness on this issue is so critical, because once people hear what is happening, once people hear what it is that Puerto Ricans have decided with their votes and their voice, they begin to join this growing coalition. Eventually, Senator Schumer and Senator McConnell will have to seat on this, and politicians come and go, and there may be a new majority or minority leader by the time this issue gains traction in the Senate. But just because they're difficult members at this point doesn't mean that you don't keep pushing and don't keep pushing for people to join this coalition that is bipartisan in nature. You have members like Representative Richie Torres from New York, who endorsed Bernie Sanders in the primary, and again, several Republicans on this bill. This is a wide coalition that you can put at the forefront and show that there is support for this issue. I think that's, again, an education process with members of Congress.
Excellent. Thank you so much for those comments, Matt. Jose, briefly, because we're going to wrap up soon.
Regarding Schumer and McConnell, just think of it this way. Even the strongest rock, if you throw it in the ocean, eventually it will wither away. Our movement has to become that ocean. We're not there yet. It's going to require some time and some effort. But a lot of states back in the day, they were able to bypass a lot of roadblocks just because there was so much consensus, not at the territorial level, but on a national scale, that a lot of people supported admission for that territory. And even the opposition of entire parties withered away because there was just so much consensus. Like Matt mentioned, eventually Schumer and McConnell, they will not be in their positions. And that will require further work down the road. But the important thing is that we start creating a national movement, just like other successful national movements before in our nation's history, so that we can bypass and maneuver around obstacles, whether it's AOC and Nydia Velázquez or McConnell or Schumer.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for those comments, Jose. I'm going to take one last question here from Alvin Irizarry. I'm in Huntsville, Alabama, pretty red state. I've already received a not so positive first response from my representative. I'm now waiting a second response, but I don't think his opinion has changed. What would be the best way to sway the opinion of my representative and senators?
So that's a great question. I think in any any meeting with any member of Congress, your legislature, city council, whatever, you have to tailor your message for the person that you're speaking to. For Republicans, talking about these are God-given unalienable rights. that we say American citizens get. What does American citizenship actually mean to you, Representative? Do you think that it is okay for these American citizens to have these rights, but these ones to not have these rights? And I think you put him on the spot, or at least make him think about what it means. What does he think or she think about what their American citizenship actually means? That's a message that I've found has been effective with people more on the conservative side of the spectrum that hold to this idea that I do, that we have rights endowed to us by our Creator. And those can't be denied by the government. And if they are being denied by the government, something is wrong. That's a message that I think could work in some of your more ruby red type districts and states.
Excellent, Matt. So I know we've had some additional questions come in. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave some of these on the table, but hopefully we'll have an opportunity to answer them again. So I just wanted to give one last question to each of you before we wrap things up. And it's, if you have one thing that you would like advocates on this call and watching this video on Facebook and eventually on YouTube when we post it there to take away from this conversation, what is that one thing that you would want them to take away? Janille.
Oh my God. So honestly, I think that, well, we have been struggling with this political status for more than a century. So honestly, taking away that we are part of America. So, and we deserve the very same rights. We deserve the very same democracy. And sometimes for me, and I don't want to sound disrespectful, but sometimes it's even ridiculous that a mainlander born and raised in the mainland, if he or she decides to move to the island, this person will lose a lot of rights, including the right to vote for the president of the United States. So my fellow statehood supporters, never give up. This is a matter of democracy. This is a matter of equal, not only civil, but human rights for Puerto Ricans.
Excellent. Thank you, Janille. Matt?
Don't be afraid to be engaged on this issue. Don't be afraid of the idea that members of Congress are people in this huge white building in the Capitol that are untouchable. That's not true. You can reach them, you can contact them. Their offices will respond to you, especially if you are a constituent. Don't be afraid to be involved. And if you are not Puerto Rican like me, don't be afraid to say, I am listening to the voices of Puerto Ricans. It is the job of the members of Congress, the voting members of Congress, to admit states, and we are constituents of those members of Congress. So we have a role here. Anyone telling you otherwise, that you can't speak on this issue, they're obstructing, quite frankly, at this point, where Puerto Ricans have raised their voice, have made their opinions known. So I think that's two things. Don't be afraid to be involved, and two, use your voice.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Matt. Quick shout out to Maria Frias from Marietta, Georgia, listening to us on the Facebook Live. Thank you for joining us there, and thank you to all the other folks that are joining us on Facebook Live. Jose, your takeaway comment.
Well, the final word: get in the arena, get involved. Salvation does not depend on third parties doing the job. Do not depend on a political party. Do not depend on others to get this done. You have to get involved. You have to get in the arena. If you need help to get in the arena, contact the people that you're seeing on the screen. Our Twitter handles are somewhere. Contact me. We'll get you squared away. But we need boots on the ground. We need you, whether you're stateside, whether you're on the island. we need to connect, and we need to get active, and we have to become very vocal.
Excellent.
So get in the arena.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Jose, for that comment. And before we finish things out, I actually wanted to take a moment to share something really important with our audience, and it's that the Puerto Rico Statehood Council is not just a Facebook page. We're not just a Twitter handle. We also have a website with really great information on it. And the most important thing that is on this website is this take action section that we've developed right here. This take action section has a number of different resources that can be helpful for you, as well as other people that you communicate with on this issue. Because by going here, you can join us and be part of our mailing list so that we can send you information about what's happening in the statehood movement and important moments. We recently established a new tool that will help anyone find their senators and representatives. This tool, with it, you can write down your address and look it up, and you actually get the information about your senators, who they are, their representatives. You can actually click on this and you get their Facebook page, their Twitter handle, their YouTube page, their website, the phone numbers for it, as well as some of the district offices. So this is great information. Tells you about, what caucuses they belong to, a little bit of information about them, and then some of the key staff members that work for them. So, it's a great tool. We also have a contact your legislators tool where we have give you the opportunity to write directly to your member of Congress. And through this tool, you can submit letters and emails and tweets that will reach your congressional office directly. And of course, you can sign up as a volunteer for PR 51st, or sign our petition, which also goes to members. And if you're so inclined, you can also submit a donation so we can continue doing this great work that we're doing, promoting statehood for Puerto Rico. And also definitely check out our blog section. We've got great posts and information on the statehood issue, analyzing different aspects of it, and things that will be valuable to you as you continue your advocacy efforts. So with that, I wanted to thank Janille, Jose, and Matt. Excellent presentations, great information. And also thank you so much to all the folks in the audience who stayed with us throughout the presentation today, live here on the Zoom call, and then also for everyone who joined us on Facebook. We'll be posting this on our Twitter page and on our YouTube page as well. So you'll see the full length video at that time. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you to everyone who's involved. Let's keep advocating for equality and democracy for the U.S. citizens of Puerto Rico. And I am confident that with sufficient effort, we can get this done and have a great impact. All right. Thank you so much. Have a good night, everyone.